Three guys thought they could rule the subway, picking on an old man with a cane and a silent stare that had seen more than they could ever imagine. Their confidence started to crack, but they had no idea this grandfather was about to turn their night into the most terrifying lesson of their lives. It all started with one fallen bracelet, but that was just the first warning. What followed next was unstoppable. It was a dreary Friday night in New York City, the kind where the subway stations felt more like a maze of tired sighs and flickering lights than a place to get anywhere. The air reeked of damp concrete, and the rumble of trains echoed through the tunnels like some kind of urban symphony. William Jones, a 62-year-old black man, stepped into a subway car, leaning on his wooden cane. William wasn't flashy, far from it. A long, dark coat hung neatly over his sturdy frame, worn but clean. A fedora tilted low over his face added a quiet dignity, though it did little to hide the lines etched by decades of life. On his wrist, a tarnished silver bracelet with the words Semper Fi glinted under the dim lights. He lowered himself into a corner seat, exhaling as if he'd just carried the weight of the world down those subway steps. Across the car, three young men immediately honed in on him. Eric, the ringleader, had the kind of grin that screamed trouble. He adjusted his backward cap and nudged Jason, the wiry one who couldn't seem to sit still. Then there was Marcus, a mountain of muscle who looked like he collected bad ideas for fun. "Yo, check out the old man," Eric said, loud enough to make sure everyone heard. "Hey, Grandpa, how about giving up that seat? You don't look like you'll be needing it much longer." William didn't even glance up. He rested both hands on the head of his cane, his fingers tightening ever so slightly. The silence seemed to irritate Eric, who leaned forward, his grin turning sharp. Jason chimed in, his voice bouncing with nervous energy. "Yo, maybe he's deaf, or scared. What's wrong, old man? Too shy to say hello?" Marcus, towering over them, cracked his knuckles and chuckled. "Or maybe he's just broke. Bet he ain't got nothing worth taking." The trio burst into laughter, their voices carrying across the nearly silent car. William remained still, his gaze fixed on the floor, but his jaw clenched just enough to be noticeable. "Boys, I'm just trying to get home," William said finally, his voice low but firm. "Leave it alone." Eric's grin widened. "Oh, he's got a little bite. What you got in that coat, huh? A couple of bucks? Some candy from the senior center?" Before William could respond, Marcus lumbered forward and grabbed his arm, yanking him up with one powerful tug. The cane slipped from William's grip and clattered to the floor, rolling under a bench. The sound echoed in the nearly empty car, but no one moved to help. The other passengers sat frozen, their eyes darting anywhere but toward the commotion. "Let's see what you're hiding, old man," Marcus growled, his hand tightening on William's sleeve. "Bet you're holding out on us." William steadied himself, gripping the seat for balance. His eyes finally lifted, locking onto Marcus with a calmness that seemed unnerving in the moment. "You don't want to do this," he said quietly. Jason laughed, but it came out shakier than he intended. "What's he gonna do? Call his bingo buddies for backup?" Eric bent down, grabbing the cane, and twirled it lazily in his hands. "Nice stick, Pops. You use this to scare pigeons or something?" With a flick of his wrist, he sent it skidding across the floor, just out of reach. The tension in the car was thick now, like the air before a thunderstorm. William straightened, his shoulders squaring ever so slightly. His gaze flicked to the cane, then back to the boys, who were too busy laughing to notice the subtle shift in his posture. For the first time, William allowed himself a faint smile. It wasn't one of amusement, but something sharper, like a man who knew far more than he let on. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The subway screeched to a halt, sending a faint jolt through the car. A handful of passengers slipped out through the doors, eager to escape the tension hanging in the air. As the train started moving again, the car grew quieter, more intimate. The trio of troublemakers now focused entirely on William, their target for the night. Jason's eyes caught the glint of silver on William's wrist, a tarnished bracelet engraved with Semper Fi. Without a second thought, he lunged forward and yanked it off. "What's this, old man? Your prize for a bake sale? What were you, a scoutmaster?" The bracelet hit the floor with a dull clang, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the silent car. William's head slowly lifted, his gaze locking onto Jason. Something shifted in his expression. His eyes, once weary, now hardened like tempered steel. His voice, low and sharp, cut through the mocking laughter. "That's not a toy. Pick it up." For a moment, Jason hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden change in William's demeanor. But Eric quickly filled the silence with a forced laugh. "Chill out, Grandpa. It's just some scrap metal. What's the big deal?" The train jolted again, sending everyone swaying. Marcus, the largest of the three, stepped forward with exaggerated bravado, planting his boot squarely on the bracelet. The screech of metal against the floor was sharp, grating. "Oops," Marcus said with a smug grin. "Looks like it's seen better days." William leaned forward slightly, his hand reaching for the bracelet. Before he could grab it, Jason smacked his hand away with a smirk. "Come on, old man. Let's see you work for it." In that instant, William froze. But his mind wasn't in the subway anymore. The dim lights and taunts faded, replaced by the deafening roar of a helicopter. He was 25 again, seated in the cramped hold of a chopper slicing through the Afghan night. Around him, his squad prepared for a high-stakes extraction, their faces set with grim determination. The air reeked of sweat and tension. His commanding officer's voice echoed in his memory. "Stay focused. Stay alive." The present snapped back into focus with a sharp breath. William's posture straightened slightly and his gaze sharpened as if he'd flipped a switch. "You don't know what you're messing with," he said, his voice quiet but laced with steel. The three young men faltered. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by unease. There was something unsettling about the way William spoke. Calm, deliberate, like someone who'd seen far worse than a subway scuffle. But Marcus, too proud to back down, stepped closer, his shoulders squaring. "What's he gonna do? Talk us to death?" He reached out and grabbed William's shoulder, his grin faltering the second William moved. In one swift motion, William's hand shot up, clamping down on Marcus's wrist. The bigger man's knees buckled as William twisted, forcing him down with ease. Marcus groaned, his free hand slapping the floor in pain. His phone slipped from his pocket, landing with a hollow thud. Jason and Eric stood frozen, their bravado replaced with shock. For a man pushing 70, William moved like a coiled spring, controlled, precise, unyielding. William's gaze shifted to Eric, who looked ready to bolt. "Pick up the bracelet," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Eric swallowed hard, his usual smirk long gone. With shaky hands, he bent down and grabbed the bracelet, holding it out like a peace offering. William released Marcus, who crumpled onto the floor, clutching his wrist. Taking the bracelet, William slid it back onto his wrist without a word. He adjusted his coat, calm as ever, but his eyes swept over the trio like a warning. This wasn't over yet. The subway car was heavy with silence, broken only by the low hum of the train speeding through the tunnel. Eric and Jason exchanged a nervous glance before lunging at William, their bravado masking a growing sense of panic. They expected the old man to crumble under pressure, but William moved like someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for moments just like this. Jason struck first, rushing toward William with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. Without hesitation, William bent low, grabbing his cane from under the bench. With one swift motion, he swung it, catching Jason hard in the legs. The younger man collapsed to the floor with a startled yelp, clutching his knee in pain. Eric froze for a second, then pulled a knife from his pocket. The blade gleamed under the flickering lights, and for a moment the car felt even quieter, as if the air itself was holding its breath. With a shaky hand, Eric lunged forward, aiming for William. But William was faster. He stepped to the side, his hand darting out to grab Eric's wrist. With a sharp twist, the knife clattered to the floor and slid out of reach. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. Jason groaned on the ground, nursing his leg, while Eric stumbled backward, cradling his wrist. Marcus, still sitting in the corner from his earlier defeat, didn't even try to get up. William straightened, leaning slightly on his cane as he surveyed the three young men. His presence was commanding, his expression calm but unyielding. The once cocky troublemakers now looked like frightened kids, their confidence drained away. "How old are you boys?" William asked, his voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. 20? 22? You think you're tough?" The three of them stayed silent, too stunned to respond. William took a step forward, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. "When I was your age," he continued, his tone firm, "I was halfway around the world, watching my friends risk everything, some of them losing everything, to save people they didn't even know. People like you." Eric opened his mouth to speak, but all that came out was a weak stammer. We didn't mean." William cut him off with a nod, his expression softening slightly. "I know you didn't. That's the problem. You don't think." Reaching down, he picked up his bracelet from the floor. He wiped it clean with his coat sleeve before slipping it back onto his wrist. The simple action was weighted with finality, as though the bracelet symbolized everything these boys couldn't understand. The train screeched to a stop, the doors sliding open with a mechanical chime. Two police officers stepped into the car, their eyes scanning the scene. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, froze when his gaze landed on William. "Colonel Jones?" the officer asked, his voice tinged with recognition. William looked up, his expression calm but alert. "Officer Daniels," he replied evenly, as though this were just a routine encounter. The officers quickly took stock of the scene. The three young men, battered and shaken, and William, standing tall with his cane in hand. Daniels stepped closer, lowering his voice. "These guys give you trouble?" William glanced at the trio. They looked small now, their earlier arrogance reduced to nervous fidgeting. After a moment's pause, he shook his head. "No," William said quietly. "They're just lucky I wasn't teaching them a real lesson." Daniels nodded, gesturing to his partner, who hauled the three young men to their feet. The trio didn't resist as they were escorted off the train, their heads hung low. The remaining passengers sat in stunned silence, stealing glances at William, but saying nothing. As the train began moving again, William returned to his seat. He adjusted his coat and hat, leaning on his cane as if nothing had happened. Around him, the passengers exchanged looks of disbelief, but no one spoke. For William, the fight was already over. How would you have handled a situation like this? What do you think about William's actions? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced something similar? Don't forget to like this story and share it with others to spark a meaningful conversation. This story was created to shine a light on real-life issues and inspire change. Together, we can make the world a better place. Your voice matters.